My wife said she's your mother, not mine. Then the will changed. I used to think keeping the peace made me a good husband. I used to think silence was maturity. That swallowing my own feelings was what a man was supposed to do. That if I stayed calm long enough, smiled through enough uncomfortable dinners, ignored enough small disappointments, eventually everything would be fine. I was wrong. It took one phone call from my mother to show me the truth about my marriage. Not a fight, not an affair. Not some dramatic secret hidden in a locked drawer. Just one phone call. At 7:18 on a Wednesday morning, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Mom. And before that morning was over, I would understand something I should have seen years earlier. Some people love you quietly your whole life. And some people stand beside you for years without ever truly showing up. My name is Daniel Bennett. I'm 55 years old, and I live just outside Columbus, Ohio, in a quiet neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and pretend they don't notice when a marriage is falling apart. My mother's name is Margaret Bennett. She is 81 years old, and she lives alone in the same house on Maple Grove Avenue where I grew up. A small white house with green shutters, a narrow driveway, and an old maple tree out front that drops leaves all over the porch every fall. My father used to complain about that tree every October. Then he'd rake the leaves anyway. Dad's name was Robert Bennett. He passed 10 years ago, and I still can't drive down that street without expecting to see him in the garage, wiping his hands on an old towel, pretending he wasn't happy to see me pull in. After he died, my mother didn't fall apart. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she got up the next morning, made coffee, folded the newspaper exactly the way Dad liked it, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair across from her. Then she kept going. That was my mother. Margaret Bennett was never the type to make speeches about love. She didn't write long birthday cards. She didn't say emotional things in front of people. She didn't need a spotlight for every sacrifice she made. She just showed up. When I was a kid playing Little League, she sat in the bleachers through freezing rain, August heat, and games where I struck out so badly I wanted to disappear. She clapped anyway. When I forgot my lunch, she brought it to school. When I came home late as a teenager, she wasn't waiting in the living room to punish me. She was waiting because she couldn't sleep until she knew I was safe. That's a different kind of love. The kind you don't appreciate enough when you're young. The kind you spend the rest of your life trying to deserve. After Dad died, Mom kept the house running on a fixed income. She clipped coupons. She stretched leftovers. She learned which bills could wait 3 days and which ones couldn't. I found out months later that she had sold the second car to help cover the funeral expenses. She never asked me for a dime. When I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said, "Your father and I always handled our business." That was it. No guilt, no complaint, no performance. Just dignity. Even after everything changed, she still hosted Sunday dinners. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock, the table was set. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, sweet tea, and a pie cooling by the window if she had the energy. Sometimes it was just me. Sometimes my wife Laura came too. And sometimes Laura had a reason not to. A headache, a work deadline, a friend's birthday, a yoga class she forgot to mention until 20 minutes before we were supposed to leave. Mom never said much about it. She would just wrap a plate in foil and tell me to take it home. She might be hungry later, she'd say. That was my mother too, always leaving room for people who rarely made room for her. For years, I told myself Laura was busy, that she had her own way of caring, that not everyone was raised like I was. I made excuses because excuses were easier than admitting the truth. And the truth was this. My mother had spent her life showing up for me. My wife had spent years deciding when it was convenient. But I didn't let myself see it. Not fully. Not until one cold Wednesday morning in February. It was 7:18 a.m. when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Mom, just one word on a screen. But somehow, before I even answered, I felt something in my chest tighten. My mother almost never called that early. She did not call to complain. She did not call for attention. She did not call unless something truly mattered. So when I picked up the phone and heard her breathing before I heard her voice, I knew. Something was wrong. And before that morning was over, I would learn 2 things I could never unlearn. My mother had spent my entire life showing up for me, and my wife had been standing beside me for 11 years without ever truly showing up at all. It was Wednesday, February 12, 7:18 in the morning. I remember the time because I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker like it had personally offended me. The machine was making that slow, tired, dripping sound it always made before sunrise. One drop at a time. Too slow to be helpful, too loud to ignore. Outside, Columbus was still waking up. The sky had that pale winter color, not quite gray, not quite blue. The kind of morning where the whole neighborhood feels like it is holding its breath. I was halfway through buttoning my shirt, thinking about work, bills, my truck in the shop, and all the little things a man thinks about before the day has had a chance to go wrong. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced down. Mom. Just one word. But something about seeing it at that hour made my stomach tighten. My mother, Margaret Bennett, did not call early unless she had a reason. And even then, she usually waited until a reasonable hour, as she liked to say. I picked up on the second ring. Hey, Mom. For a moment, there was nothing. No greeting, no little laugh, no, did I catch you at a bad time? Just breathing. Thin breathing. The kind you hear and immediately know something is not right. I stood up straighter. Mom? Another breath came through the phone, uneven and soft. Daniel, she said. That was all. But it did not sound like her. My mother's voice had always been steady, even when Dad passed, even at the funeral, even when the furnace broke in the middle of January and she stood in the kitchen wearing 2 sweaters, telling me she was perfectly fine. That morning, her voice sounded smaller, like it had traveled a long way just to reach me. Mom, what's wrong? I don't want to bother you, she said. I closed my eyes for half a second. Of course, that was the first thing she said. Not, I need help. Not, I'm scared. Not, something is wrong. I don't want to bother you. That was Margaret Bennett, in one sentence. 81 years old, alone in the house where she had raised me, and still worried about taking up space in somebody else's mourning. Mom, I said, keeping my voice calm. You're not bothering me. Tell me what's going on. There was a pause. Then she whispered, my chest feels tight. The kitchen seemed to go quiet around me. The coffee kept dripping, but I stopped hearing it the same way. How tight? I asked. I don't know. Just tight. And my breathing feels heavy. My hand tightened around the phone. Are you sitting down? I was going to make tea. No, I said, sharper than I meant to. Then I softened my voice. No, Mom. Sit down right now. I'm sure it's nothing. Mom. That one word stopped her. For a second, I heard the old mother in her, the woman who knew when I meant something. Then she said, very quietly, my left arm feels strange too. Everything inside me went still. There are certain phrases you do not ignore, not when they come from your mother, not when she is 81, not when she has spent her whole life pretending pain is just an inconvenience. Chest tightness, heavy breathing, left arm going numb. I was already moving before I realized I had moved. Listen to me, I said. Go to the living room, sit in your chair, unlock the front door. Do not try to drive. Do not go upstairs. Do not make tea. Daniel, I hate making a fuss. You're not making a fuss. I just didn't want to call so early. Mom, I'm glad you called. And I meant it. I was terrified. But I was glad she called. Because my mother was the kind of woman who would rather suffer quietly than inconvenience anyone. If she had waited another hour, another 30 minutes, even another 10, I did not know what would happen. Can you unlock the door for me? I asked. Yes. Do it now. Then sit down and stay on the phone with me. I heard movement on her end. Slow footsteps. A faint click of the front door lock. Then she came back, breathing a little harder. I'm sitting, she said. Good. I'm coming. I hung up and turned toward the garage. For 3 seconds I had a plan. Grab my keys, get in my truck, drive straight to Maple Grove Avenue, take Mom to Riverside Methodist. Simple. Then I opened the garage door and saw the empty space where my truck should have been. And I remembered. My 2018 Ford F-150 was at Miller Auto Repair. Bad alternator. They had called me the day before and said it would not be ready until Friday at the earliest. I stood there staring at the empty garage like a fool, my heart pounding hard enough to feel it in my throat. No, no, no. I turned and hurried to the front window. There was one vehicle in the driveway. Laura's white Toyota Highlander. Clean, full tank, parked right beside the walkway like an answer waiting for me. For one brief second, relief washed through me. Of course. Laura had a car. I would explain what was happening. She would hand me the keys. Maybe she would even come with me. Maybe she would be worried. Maybe she would remember that my mother had set a place for her at Sunday dinner, more times than I could count. I believed that. I really did. Because even after 11 years of marriage, after all the small disappointments I had swallowed, there was still a part of me that thought emergencies brought out the best in people. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. Upstairs, I could hear water running in the bathroom. Laura was getting ready for work. I called her name. Laura. The shower kept running. I called again, louder this time. Laura, I need you. The water stopped. A few seconds passed. Then her voice came from upstairs. What? Not worried, not alarmed, just irritated. I looked back at my phone in my hand, thinking of my mother sitting alone in that little house on Maple Grove Avenue, trying not to be a burden while her body was warning her something was wrong. I took a breath. My mom's having chest pain, I called up. Her left arm is going numb. I need your car. I have to get her to Riverside right now. For a moment, the whole house went silent. And in that silence, I still believed my wife would do the right thing. I honestly did. I thought any person would. I thought Laura would come down those stairs with the keys in her hand. I thought she would say, go. I thought, at the very least, she would ask, is Margaret okay? But that is not what happened. And what she said next changed the way I saw my marriage forever. For a few seconds after I called up the stairs, the house was completely quiet. The shower had stopped. The coffee maker had gone silent behind me. And all I could hear was my own breathing. Too fast, too shallow, while my mother sat alone across town, with her front door unlocked, and her hand probably pressed against her chest. Then Laura's voice came from upstairs. What do you mean, your mom's having chest pain? There was irritation in her tone, not fear, not concern. I told myself not to judge it too quickly. People react strangely when they are surprised. I knew that. I wanted to believe that once she understood, everything would shift. So I said it again, slower this time. Mom called me. Her chest feels tight. Her breathing is heavy. Her left arm is going numb. My truck is still at Miller Auto Repair, so I need your car. I have to get her to Riverside right now. I waited. A bedroom door opened. Laura stepped out a moment later wearing her robe, her hair wrapped in a towel, one hand holding her phone, like she had already been in the middle of something more important. She stood at the top of the stairs and looked down at me, not at my shoes, not at the keys in my hand, at me. As if I had brought her a problem she did not order. Why don't you just call an ambulance? She asked. I blinked. That was her first question. Not, is she okay? Not, do you want me to come? Not even, how bad is it? Just, why don't you call someone else? I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice steady. Because she's scared of ambulances. You know that. Laura sighed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to hear it. Daniel, a lot of people don't like ambulances. She was in one with my dad the morning he died, I said. She never got over it. Laura looked away for half a second, and for that half second, I thought maybe it had landed. Maybe the memory of Dad would soften something in her. Maybe she would come down the stairs, grab her purse, and say, okay, let's go. But she didn't move. Instead, she tightened the belt on her robe and said, I have a meeting at 9. I stared at her. My mother might be having a heart attack. I heard you, she said. Those 3 words were worse than if she had misunderstood. Because she had heard me. She knew exactly what I was saying, and she was still standing there thinking about her calendar. I took one step closer to the stairs. Laura, I'm not asking for your whole day. I just need the Highlander for a few hours. I'll drop Mom at Riverside, make sure she's checked in, and I'll figure out the rest. She rubbed her forehead like I was giving her a headache. I also have dinner tonight. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because my mind could not make those 2 things sit in the same room. My mother's chest pain. Laura's dinner plans. What dinner? I asked, even though I already knew. Joanne and the girls. Short North. We planned it 2 weeks ago. I looked at her for a long moment. 2 weeks. As if that mattered. As if a restaurant reservation had weighed against an 81-year-old woman alone in a house with her left arm going numb. I looked down at my phone. No new call from Mom. That should have comforted me. It didn't. Laura, I said quietly, listen to yourself. Her expression changed then. Just a little. It hardened. I am listening, and I'm telling you my day is complicated too. Complicated? Yes, complicated. I can't just drop everything every time your mother has a scare. Every time. That phrase sat between us like a door closing. My mother almost never asked for anything. Laura knew that. Everybody knew that. Margaret Bennett would sooner sit in the dark than call someone to change a light bulb before breakfast. This isn't a scare, I said. Chest tightness, left arm numbness, heavy breathing. That's not nothing. You don't know what it is. No, I said. That's why I'm trying to get her to a hospital. Laura looked past me toward the kitchen, toward the coffee, toward the normal morning she wanted to keep. Then she said, "Can't Harold take you?" I felt something shift inside me. Not break. Not yet. Just shift. Like a picture frame on a wall after the house settles. "You want me to call our neighbor before my own wife lets me borrow her car?" She didn't answer. And that silence told me more than any speech could have. I gripped the banister with one hand. "Laura, please." I hated how that word sounded coming out of my mouth. Please. Asking my wife to help me save time while my mother sat alone and afraid. Laura looked down at me, and her face was calm in a way I will never forget. "Daniel," she said, "she's your mother, not mine." There it was. No shouting. No dramatic music. No slammed door. Just one sentence, spoken in a quiet house on a Wednesday morning. And somehow, it explained 11 years. Every missed Sunday dinner. Every excuse. Every time I told myself she was tired, busy, stressed, misunderstood. I stood there frozen, not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. I stood there because, for the first time, I saw my marriage without the story I had built around it. Laura was not confused. She was not overwhelmed. She simply did not care enough to be inconvenienced. I looked at her, waiting for something. A correction, an apology, a flicker of shame, anything. But she only turned back toward the bedroom. "I'm sorry," she said, though she did not sound sorry. "You'll have to figure it out." Then she closed the door, gently. That was the part that stayed with me. She did not slam it. She did not cry. She did not even hesitate. She closed it like the conversation was finished. Like my mother's life had become an item she had removed from her schedule. I stood at the bottom of those stairs for maybe 3 seconds. That was all I allowed myself. 3 seconds to feel the shock. 3 seconds to understand what I had just heard. Then I picked up my phone. Because my mother did not have 3 extra seconds to waste. And if my wife would not show up, I would find someone who would. I gave myself 3 seconds. That was all. 3 seconds to stand at the bottom of the stairs and let Laura's words settle into me. "She's your mother, not mine." 3 seconds to feel the shock. 3 seconds to understand that my wife had looked at an emergency and seen an inconvenience. Then I moved. Because my mother was sitting alone on Maple Grove Avenue with her front door unlocked, trying not to make a fuss while her chest tightened and her left arm went numb. I did not have time to argue with Laura. I did not have time to convince a grown woman to care. So I opened my contacts and called the one man I knew would answer. Harold Jenkins. Harold lived 3 houses down from us, in a brick ranch with an American flag by the porch and a garage so clean you could eat off the floor. He was 69 years old, retired from the Columbus Fire Department, and still walked like he heard a bell ringing somewhere. He had known my father for more than 20 years. They used to drink coffee together in Harold's garage on Saturday mornings, arguing about baseball, lawnmowers, and which one of them had the worst knees. When Dad died, Harold didn't send flowers and disappear. He showed up. He fixed Mom's loose porch rail without being asked. He cleaned the gutters that fall. He sat with me after the funeral, when everyone else had gone home, and said absolutely nothing for nearly 20 minutes. And somehow, that was exactly what I needed. So that morning, with my hands shaking and my truck stuck at Miller Auto Repair, I called him. He picked up on the first ring. "Daniel?" No sleepy confusion. No irritation. Just his voice, solid and alert. "Harold," I said, and I hated how rough my voice sounded. "I need help. Mom's having chest pain. Her breathing's heavy. Her left arm is going numb. My truck's in the shop, and I need to get her to Riverside." There was no pause. Not even 1 second. "I'm getting in the car," he said. "Give me 5 minutes." That was it. No questions about why Laura couldn't drive. No lecture about calling an ambulance. No reminder that it was early, or cold, or inconvenient. Just 5 minutes. I stood there holding the phone after he hung up, staring at the screen like it had shown me something I should have understood years ago. People who want to show up do not need a perfect situation. They just move. I called Mom back immediately. She answered on the second ring. Daniel? I'm coming, Mom. Harold's driving us. Are you still sitting down? Yes, honey. Her voice was thin, but she was trying to sound normal. That almost made it worse. Is the front door unlocked? Yes. Good. Stay in the chair. Don't get up. Don't try to put on makeup. Don't change clothes. Don't make tea. There was a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh. I'm still in my housecoat. Then you're going to Riverside in your housecoat. Oh, Daniel. Mom, I mean it. I know you do. I stepped onto the porch while still holding the phone. The February air hit my face cold and sharp. Across the street, someone's porch light flickered off. A school bus groaned around the corner. The world was moving like it was any normal morning, but it was not normal. Not for me, not for my mother, and maybe not for my marriage either. Harold's old Chevrolet Impala turned onto the street before the 5 minutes were up. Dark blue, a little rust near the wheel well, engine humming low and steady like the man himself. He pulled up to the curb, leaned across the passenger seat, and pushed the door open. "Get in," he said. I climbed in, still holding my phone. He looked at me once, just once, and then pulled away from the curb. He did not ask what happened with Laura. Maybe he knew enough not to. Maybe he saw it on my face. Or maybe men like Harold understood that when somebody's mother might be in trouble, explanations could wait. We drove fast, but not reckless. Harold kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, jaw set. He knew the side streets, knew which lights stayed red too long, knew how to move through a morning without wasting a second. I kept Mom on speaker. "Harold's with me," I told her. "We're almost there." "Oh, Harold," Mom said softly. "I'm so sorry to drag you out this early." Harold glanced at the phone and shook his head. "Margaret, don't you start apologizing to me. I just hate being trouble." "You are not trouble," he said. "You're family." The car went quiet after that. I looked out the window because I did not want either of them to hear what that sentence did to me. Your family. Simple words. No speech. No performance. Just a retired firefighter in an old Impala saying what my own wife could not bring herself to feel. We pulled up in front of Mom's house at 7:34. Her porch light was still on. The curtains were half open. The maple tree in the yard stood bare against the winter sky. I was out of the car before Harold had fully stopped. I ran up the walkway, opened the unlocked door, and found my mother sitting in her living room chair with one hand pressed lightly to her chest. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Still, when she saw me, she tried to smile. "I didn't want to scare you," she said. I crossed the room and took her hand. "You did the right thing calling me." Harold came in behind me, calm and steady. "Morning, Margaret," he said. "Let's get you checked out." Mom looked embarrassed, like we had caught her doing something impolite. "I'm sorry, Harold." He helped her stand carefully. Then he looked her right in the eye and said, "Margaret, this is what neighbors do." I felt those words land somewhere deep. Because that morning, Harold Jenkins did more than drive us to a hospital. He showed me the difference between someone who lives near you and someone who actually shows up. And as I helped my mother into the back seat of that old Impala, I knew I would never forget it. Harold got us to Riverside Methodist Hospital at 7:56 that morning. I remember the clock above the emergency entrance. Red numbers. 7:56. Funny what your mind holds on to when everything else feels like it is moving too fast. Harold pulled up to the curb, and I was out before the car had fully stopped. I opened the back door and helped Mom out as carefully as I could. She tried to stand straight. Of course she did. Even with one hand pressed lightly against her chest, even with her breathing uneven, Margaret Bennett still wanted to look like she was not causing trouble. "I can walk," she said. "I know you can," I told her. "But let me help you anyway." She gave me that look mothers give when they want to argue but know they do not have the energy. Harold came around the other side and held the door open. "Come on, Margaret," he said gently. "Let's get you checked out." The emergency room was already busy. A young father holding a toddler with a blanket. An older man coughing into his sleeve. A woman at the front desk typing faster than anyone I had ever seen. Hospitals have a sound to them, sneakers on polished floors, phones ringing, machines beeping somewhere behind closed doors, people trying very hard to stay calm. I walked Mom to the desk and started explaining before the woman even finished asking for her name. My mother's 81, chest tightness, heavy breathing, left arm numbness. The woman's expression changed immediately. Not panic, training. She stood up and called over her shoulder. Denise? A nurse came through the doors almost right away. Her name tag said Denise Carter. She had kind eyes, but there was nothing soft about the way she moved. She looked at my mother once, then at me, and I could tell she understood. Mrs. Bennett? She asked. Mom nodded. I'm sorry. I really don't want to be dramatic. Denise gave her a small smile. You're not being dramatic. You're being smart. Then she turned to me. We're going to bring her back now. That word now was the first thing that both comforted me and scared me. Because when a hospital moves fast, you are grateful and terrified. They placed Mom in a wheelchair, and for a second, she looked embarrassed. Not scared, embarrassed. Like needing help was somehow less acceptable than chest pain. I bent down beside her. I'm right behind you. She touched my wrist. I know. Denise rolled her through the double doors, and I followed as far as they let me. A few minutes later, they brought me into a room where Mom was already lying in a hospital bed, wires being placed on her chest, a blood pressure cuff tightening around her arm. A doctor came in not long after. Tall, maybe mid-40s, calm voice, tired eyes. I'm Dr. Samuel Pierce, he said. Mrs. Bennett, we're going to run an EKG, check your blood work, and keep you monitored for a while. With the symptoms you're describing, we don't ignore this. Mom looked at me. That was the moment I saw fear in her eyes. Not much, just enough. My mother had faced bills, grief, widowhood, winter storms, broken appliances, and 10 years of sleeping alone in the house she had once shared with my father. But there in that hospital bed, under those bright lights, she looked at me like a child asking if everything was going to be okay. I took her hand. I'm here, Mom. She squeezed my fingers, weak but steady. Then she whispered, You came. 2 words. That was all. And somehow, those 2 words almost took me apart. Because my mother had come for me my entire life. She came to every school play, even when I only had 1 line. She came to every baseball game, even when I sat on the bench. She came to my house with soup when I had the flu at 37 years old and insisted I was fine. She came after Dad died too. Not physically. She was the one grieving most. But emotionally, somehow she still showed up for me. And now, lying there with wires on her chest, she sounded grateful that I had done the bare minimum a son should do. I leaned closer. I'll always come. She closed her eyes for a moment, and I sat beside her until Denise told me they needed a little space to finish the tests. So I went to the waiting room. Harold was there, sitting near the window, hands folded, coat still on. You okay? He asked. I nodded, even though I was not. She's being checked. Good. That was all he said. And it was enough. I sat under those harsh hospital lights for almost 3 hours. The chair was hard plastic. The coffee from the vending machine tasted burnt. A television in the corner played a morning talk show with the volume turned too low to understand. Every few minutes I checked my phone. Nothing from Laura. No missed call. No text. No. Is Margaret okay? No. Did you make it? No. I'm sorry. Nothing. At first, I told myself maybe she was getting ready. Then maybe she was driving. Then maybe she was in her meeting. But after a while, excuses started sounding exactly like what they were. Excuses. Near noon, Dr. Pierce came through the double doors and called my name. Mr. Bennett? I stood so fast the coffee cup nearly tipped over. He walked toward me with a careful expression. Not grim, but serious. Your mother had what we would call a mild cardiac event, he said. It does not appear to be a major heart attack, but her body was warning her. We want to keep her here for observation, run a few more tests, and adjust her medication. I let out a breath I had been holding for hours. She's stable? She's stable, he said. And she's asking when she can have real coffee. For the first time all morning, I almost laughed. That sounds like her. Dr. Pierce smiled faintly. She's tough. I looked toward the doors where they had taken my mother. Yes, I said quietly. She is. And as relief washed through me, something else settled underneath it. Cold, clear, impossible to ignore. My mother had almost faced the scariest morning of her life. Harold had shown up without hesitation. Doctors and nurses who had never met her moved like she mattered. And Laura had not even asked if she was alive. I stayed with Mom at Riverside until the sky outside her window started turning the color of old silver. The doctors had done what doctors do. They checked her heart. They checked her blood. They checked the numbers on machines I did not fully understand, then told me the words I had been waiting to hear. Stable. That word should have made everything inside me relax. And it did. For a while. But stable does not erase the sight of your mother lying in a hospital bed with wires on her chest. Stable does not erase the sound of her voice when she whispered, "You came." Stable does not erase the empty screen on your phone when the one person who should have cared never even asked if she was okay. Mom tried to make the afternoon feel normal. That was her way. She asked if Harold had eaten. She asked if I had called work. She asked if I remembered to take the trash cans back from the curb. I looked at her lying there in that hospital bed, pale and tired, still trying to manage everyone else's day. "Mom," I said, "you just had a cardiac event. The trash cans can wait." She gave me a little look. "The city does not wait, Daniel." And there she was, Margaret Bennett. 81 years old, hooked up to hospital monitors, still worried about trash collection. I laughed because I needed to. Because if I did not laugh, I was afraid something else might come out. The nurse found an old game show on the television, and Mom insisted we watch it. The sound was too low at first, so I got up and fixed it. Then the remote stopped working, so I stood there pressing the same button 6 times like that was going to change anything. Mom watched me struggle for a full minute before saying, "Maybe the remote is not the problem." I turned and looked at her. She had the smallest smile on her face. That was the first real smile I had seen from her all day. So I sat back down, and for a little while, we pretended the room was not a hospital room. We guessed answers before the contestants did. She got most of them right. I missed one so badly she shook her head, like I had personally embarrassed the family. For a few minutes, it felt almost normal. Almost. But every time the machine beside her bed beeped, I remembered why we were there. Every time she shifted under the blanket, I saw how tired she really was. Her face looked smaller somehow, not weaker exactly. My mother never looked weak to me, but worn down, like the day had taken something from her. Around early evening, a nurse came in, checked her vitals, adjusted something on the monitor, and told us the doctor wanted to keep her overnight. Mom nodded politely. She did not argue. That scared me a little too. Margaret Bennett argued with weather reports. If she was too tired to argue with a doctor, I knew the day had hit her harder than she wanted to admit. When the nurse left, the room got quiet. The television kept playing, but neither of us was watching anymore. I was sitting in the chair beside her bed, elbows on my knees, turning my phone over and over in my hand. Still nothing from Laura. No missed calls, no texts, no apology, no question, just silence. Mom noticed. Of course she did. Mothers notice the things you try to hide. She looked toward the window first, not at me. The hospital glass reflected the room back at us. Her bed, my chair, the pale blue blanket. The lines in my face I had not realized had gotten so deep. Then she asked quietly, "Did Laura come?" There it was. One simple question. I could have lied. I could have said she had a work emergency. I could have said she planned to come tomorrow. I could have protected Laura the way I had protected her for years. That was what I usually did. I softened things. I explained things. I made excuses before anyone else even had to ask. But something about that room made lying feel disrespectful. Not to Laura, to my mother. So I took a breath and told the truth. "No, Mom. She did not come. Mom did not move." I looked down at my hands. She had dinner plans with Joanne and the girls. The words sounded even worse once they were out loud. For a long moment, Mom said nothing. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not call Laura selfish or cold or anything else she would have had every right to say. She just turned her head and looked out the window. The sun was almost gone by then, and the city lights were starting to come on outside. I watched her face in the reflection. That was when I saw it. Not surprise. Recognition. Like she had been handed the final piece of a puzzle she never wanted to finish. "She did not come to your father's reception either," Mom said softly. I looked up. "She said she had a migraine." Mom nodded. "She may have." "I never said she didn't. That was my mother. Fair even when hurt, but she did not come." The room felt smaller. Mom kept looking out the window. When I had my knee surgery, she was busy that whole week. I remembered that. I had taken Mom to physical therapy before work, then picked up groceries after. Laura had said hospitals made her uncomfortable. I had accepted that, because accepting it was easier than questioning it. And Christmas 2 years ago, Mom continued, when I had the flu, I remembered that too. Laura had stayed home because she said she did not want to get sick. I had gone alone, brought soup, checked Mom's temperature, then came home and told myself Laura was just being careful. One memory after another began lining up in my mind. Sunday dinners missed, birthdays cut short, phone calls ignored, excuses delivered with perfect timing. I had spent years treating each one like a separate thing, but they were not separate. They were a pattern, and somehow my mother had seen it long before I did. "I'm sorry," I said. Mom finally turned from the window. Her eyes were tired but clear. "Don't apologize for someone else's choices, Daniel." That sentence landed harder than I expected, because that was exactly what I had been doing. For 11 years, I had been apologizing for Laura in quiet ways, covering for her, explaining her, making her absence sound softer than it was. Mom reached for my hand. I gave it to her. She squeezed once. "She showed you who she is today," Mom said. "Maybe she has been showing you for a long time." I could not answer, because she was right. When I left the hospital that evening, I was not burning with anger. Anger would have felt simple. What I felt was colder than that, clearer. I walked through the automatic doors into the winter air, and I finally understood something I had spent years avoiding. My marriage had not fallen apart that morning. That morning only showed me how empty it had already become. I woke up before the alarm. Thursday, February 13th. The room was still dark, and for a few seconds, I did not know where I was. Then it all came back. The phone call. The hospital. My mother's hand in mine, her voice whispering, "You came." I turned my head on the pillow. Laura was asleep beside me, peaceful, comfortable, completely untouched by the day before. Her breathing was slow and even. One hand rested under her cheek. Her phone sat face down on the nightstand, charging like nothing in the world had happened. I watched her for a moment, and I waited to feel something familiar. Anger, sadness, maybe even hope. But what I felt was quieter than that. It was the feeling you get when you finally stop arguing with the truth. I slipped out of bed without waking her. Downstairs, the house was cold in that early morning way, before the heat fully kicks on. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and stood there listening to it start. Same kitchen, same counter, same machine, but everything felt different. 24 hours earlier, I had stood in that exact spot with my phone in my hand while my mother told me her chest was tight and her left arm felt strange. 24 hours earlier, I had still believed my wife would come down those stairs and do the decent thing. That belief felt far away now, like it belonged to a younger man. I poured coffee into a mug and sat at the table. I did not drink it right away. I just held it between both hands and stared at the empty chair across from me. Mom's words kept playing in my mind. "You came." 2 simple words, but they carried more weight than anything Laura had said to me in years. Because my mother never left me alone when I was scared. Not when I was 6 years old and broke my arm falling off my bike. Not when I was 17 and came home after a bad breakup, pretending I was fine. Not when Dad died and I tried to be strong for everyone, even though I felt like the floor had disappeared under me. She was always there, quietly, steadily, without needing to be asked twice. And the one morning she needed someone to come for her, my own wife had treated it like a scheduling conflict. I heard footsteps on the stairs a little after 7. Laura came into the kitchen in a robe, her hair pulled back, her face still soft from sleep. She stopped when she saw me sitting there. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she walked to the cabinet, took down a mug, and poured herself coffee. "How's Margaret?" she asked. Margaret, not your mom. Not Mom. Not even, "How is she doing?" Just Margaret. Polite, distant, like she was asking about a neighbor she barely knew. I looked at her over my mug. "She's stable," I said. "They're keeping her another day for observation." Laura nodded slowly. "That's good." I waited. I do not know what I was waiting for. Maybe an apology. Maybe a little shame. Maybe one sentence that sounded like she understood what had almost happened. Instead, she leaned against the counter and wrapped both hands around her mug. "Daniel," she said, "yesterday was really difficult." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because there it was again. Yesterday had been difficult. For her. I set my cup down carefully. My mother had chest pain, trouble breathing, and numbness in her left arm. "I know," Laura said quickly. but I didn't know it was that serious. I looked at her. You didn't know? Her eyes moved away from mine. I mean, you were upset. I thought maybe you were overreacting. There it was. Not the exact words she had used yesterday, but the same meaning. My fear had been an overreaction. My mother's emergency had been an inconvenience. Her choice had been reasonable, because she had decided it was. I leaned back in my chair. Laura, I told you exactly what was happening. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. Calmly. Quietly. I said chest pain. I said her left arm was going numb. I said I needed to get her to Riverside. You heard all of that. Laura's face tightened. I had a work meeting. And dinner plans. She looked at me then. A flash of embarrassment crossed her face, but it was gone quickly. That's not fair. No, I said. It isn't. The kitchen went silent. She looked down into her coffee like the answer might be floating there. I was going to check in later, she said. Later? My voice stayed calm, but something inside me turned cold. She was in the emergency room, Laura. I understand that now. No, I said gently. I think you understand there are consequences now. Her eyes snapped up. That was the first time I saw real concern in her face. Not for Mom, for herself. And that told me more than her excuses ever could. She started talking faster. Daniel, I think this is being blown out of proportion. I'm not a bad person. I just had a full day, and I didn't think. That's the problem, I said. She stopped. I stood up, rinsed my mug, and set it in the sink. For 11 years, I had kept peace in this house by swallowing the things that hurt me. I had explained Laura to my mother. I had explained my mother to Laura. I had stood in the middle until I convinced myself that being tired was the same as being patient. But that morning, I was done explaining. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair. Laura watched me. Where are you going? To the hospital. Daniel, we need to talk about this. I looked at her then, really looked at her. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel the need to soften the truth. No, I said. You need to think about it. I took my keys from the counter. My mother spent her whole life showing up for me. Yesterday, she needed someone to show up for her. Laura's face changed, but I was already walking toward the door. And you made your choice. I stepped outside into the cold February morning. The air hit my face sharp and clean. Behind me, the house was quiet. Ahead of me, my mother was waiting in a hospital room. And for once, I did not feel torn between them. I knew exactly where I needed to be. When I walked into Mom's hospital room the next morning, I expected to find her sleeping. After everything she had been through, I thought maybe she would finally let herself rest. But that was not Margaret Bennett. My mother was sitting upright in bed with 2 pillows behind her back, her reading glasses low on her nose, and a crossword puzzle book open in her lap. There was a paper cup of hospital coffee on the tray beside her, untouched. That told me she was recovering. Because if my mother was healthy enough to complain about coffee, she was still very much herself. She looked up when I came in and gave me a small smile. 7 letters, she said. I stopped at the door. What? 7 letters. Means someone who avoids responsibility. I stared at her for a second. Then she looked back down at the crossword and tapped the page with her pen. For the puzzle, Daniel. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding and laughed softly. Coward, I said. She counted the boxes. Too short. Freeloader? Too long. Excuse maker? She looked over her glasses at me. That is not 7 letters, and now you are just being personal. For the first time since the phone call, the room felt almost normal. Almost. I walked over, kissed her forehead, and sat in the chair beside her bed. Her color looked better than it had the day before, but the tiredness was still there. It sat under her eyes. It showed in the way she held the pen a little slower than usual. Still, there was something else in her face too. Something calm, something settled, like she had spent the night thinking, and whatever decision she had reached, she was not afraid of it. I noticed it before she said a word. You sleep okay? I asked. Well enough for a hospital, she said. Which means no. I smiled. She closed the crossword book and rested both hands on top of it. That small movement changed the room. The air felt different. I sat a little straighter. Daniel, she said, I want to call Thomas Whitaker. I knew the name immediately. Thomas Whitaker had been our family attorney for years. He helped settle Dad's estate after Robert Bennett passed. He knew about the house on Maple Grove Avenue. He knew about Dad's old investment accounts. the savings, the insurance papers, and the 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle sitting under a cover in Mom's garage. That car had been Dad's pride. He restored it piece by piece over 5 years, mostly on weekends, mostly with me handing him the wrong tools. After Dad died, Mom never sold it. She said some things were worth more than money. So when she said she wanted to call Thomas, I understood what she meant. She wanted to talk about her will. I looked at her carefully. Mom, I said, you don't have to make any big decisions right now. She raised one eyebrow. That eyebrow had corrected me more times in my life than any speech ever could. Daniel Bennett, she said, I am 81 years old, not confused. I know that. Then don't talk to me like I am. I closed my mouth. She softened a little and reached for my hand. I know you mean well, she said. But I have been thinking about this longer than one night. That sentence landed quietly. Longer than one night. So this was not just about Laura refusing the car. It was not just about dinner with her friends while Mom was in the emergency room. That had been the final thing. Not the first thing. Mom looked toward the window. Morning light came through the blinds in thin lines across her blanket. Your father and I built that house together, she said. Not just with money, with years, with work, with going without things we wanted so you could have what you needed. I did not say anything, she continued. We saved what we could. We paid off the mortgage. We kept our promises. We tried to leave something behind that meant more than a number on a bank statement. Her voice was steady, not angry. That almost made it harder to hear. I do not want what we built going to someone who only shows up when there is something to gain. I looked down at our hands. Mom, no, she said gently. Listen to me. So I did. Laura did not become who she is yesterday, Mom said. Yesterday only made it impossible to keep pretending. I felt that in my chest. Because I had been pretending too. Pretending missed dinners did not matter. Pretending cold comments were just stress. Pretending a marriage could survive on habit alone. Mom squeezed my hand once. I am not doing this to punish her, she said. I am correcting something I should have corrected a long time ago. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only clarity. That was the word for it. Clarity. The kind that comes when a person has given enough chances and finally stops apologizing for having boundaries. She picked up her phone from the bedside table and found Thomas Whitaker's number in her contacts. Before she pressed call, she looked at me. I need you to understand something, Daniel. Being kind does not mean letting people disrespect you, and being family does not mean someone gets to take without ever showing up. I swallowed hard, because she was not only talking about her will anymore. She was talking about me, about my marriage, about the years I had spent keeping peace with someone who had never cared enough to stand beside me when it mattered. Mom pressed the call button. Thomas answered after 2 rings. Mrs. Bennett, he said warmly. How are you? Mom sat a little taller in that hospital bed. I'm in Riverside Methodist, she said. I had a health scare yesterday. I'm stable now, but I need to update my documents. There was a short pause. Then Thomas said, Do you want me to come to you? Yes, Mom said. Today, if you can. Another pause. I can be there this afternoon. Good, she said. There are changes I should have made sooner. She ended the call and set the phone down. Then she picked up her crossword again, as if she had not just shifted the future of our family with one calm phone call. I sat beside her, unable to speak for a moment. And right there, in that quiet hospital room, I finally understood something my mother had known for years. Love shows up, respect shows up, family shows up. And when someone keeps choosing not to, eventually, they should not be surprised when the door closes without them. Thomas Whitaker arrived at Riverside Methodist at exactly 2:15 that afternoon. I remember because Mom looked at the clock on the wall and gave a tiny nod, like punctuality itself had passed some kind of test. That man was always on time, she said. A minute later, there was a soft knock on the door. Thomas stepped in wearing a dark gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and an old file folder tucked under his arm. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair, calm eyes, and the kind of presence that made a room feel quieter without him asking for it. Mrs. Bennett, he said warmly. Mom smiled from the hospital bed. Thomas, thank you for coming. Of course. He shook my hand, then pulled a chair closer to Mom's bed. Before he opened the file, before he took out a pen, before he even asked what she wanted changed, he looked at her carefully. Not in a cold way, in a professional way. Margaret, he said, I need to ask you a few questions first. Mom gave him a look. You want to make sure I still know what I'm doing. Thomas smiled gently. That is exactly right. Good, she said. Then ask. He asked her the date, where she was, why she was in the hospital, who I was, who had called him, what documents she wanted to discuss. Mom answered every question clearly. No hesitation, no confusion, no drama. When he finished, Thomas closed his pen for a moment and nodded. Mrs. Bennett is alert and fully capable of making her own decisions, he said, mostly for the record, but also for me. I did not realize how badly I needed to hear that until he said it, because part of me still wanted to believe this was just the hospital talking, the fear, the exhaustion, the shock of what Laura had done. But it was not. My mother was not reacting. She was deciding. Thomas opened the old file and spread a few documents across the rolling tray table. I stood near the window, not wanting to hover, not wanting to influence her, but unable to leave either. Mom noticed. Of course she did. Daniel, she said, sit down. So I sat. And for nearly an hour I listened while my mother quietly changed the future of our family. There was no anger in her voice. That is what I remember most. She did not raise her tone when she mentioned Laura. She did not insult her. She did not call her selfish. She did not try to make Thomas take sides. She simply told him what she wanted. The house on Maple Grove Avenue was to go to me. That house. The one with the green shutters and the old maple tree out front. The house where Dad taught me how to ride a bike in the driveway. The house where Mom had cooked Sunday dinners for decades. The house my parents had paid off one careful payment at a time. Mom placed her hand on the document and said, Robert and I built that home for family. For someone who understands what it means. Thomas wrote it down. Then came Dad's investment accounts. Small, steady accounts he had built over years of overtime, skipped vacations, and brown bag lunches. Nothing flashy, nothing careless. Just the kind of money working people save when they believe tomorrow matters. Those were to go to me too. The retirement savings, the remaining family assets, the personal belongings with meaning. All of it was handled calmly, line by line. Then Thomas asked about the Chevelle. For the first time that afternoon, Mom's face changed. The 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle sat under a cover in her garage, still smelling faintly of motor oil and old leather. Dad had restored it with his own hands. I had spent half my teenage years beside him in that garage, handing him wrenches, holding flashlights, and pretending I understood what he was teaching me. Truth was, he was teaching me more than cars. Patience, work, pride, how to finish what you start. Mom looked at me. The Chevelle goes to Daniel, she said. That car belongs with him. I looked away for a second, not because I disagreed, because I could almost hear Dad's radio playing in that garage. Thomas made the note. Then Mom added one more thing. $25,000 to the Franklin County Dog Shelter. Thomas looked up and smiled. You still support them? Every year, Mom said. I had known she liked that shelter. I did not know she had been quietly helping them for years. That was my mother. Even in a hospital bed, after a heart scare, she was thinking about who else could be helped. Finally, Thomas reached the part everyone knew was coming. Laura. Her name had been listed before. Not as the main beneficiary, but enough that she would have benefited from what my parents had built if something happened to Mom and then to me. Mom looked at the page for a long moment. Then she said, remove her. 2 words. No anger, no shaking voice. Just remove her. Thomas did not react. He simply asked the necessary questions, confirmed the instruction, and wrote it down. I sat there with my hands folded, feeling the weight of it. Not because Laura was losing money, because she was losing the benefit of a place she had never honored, a family she had never truly joined, and a woman she had treated like an inconvenience when it mattered most. When everything was finished, Thomas reviewed the changes slowly. Mom listened to every word. Then he placed the papers in front of her and handed her the pen. She signed her name with a steady hand. Margaret Ann Bennett. One calm signature. That was all it took. Not a shouted accusation, not a public scene, not revenge dressed up as cruelty. Just a woman protecting the life she and her husband had built. Thomas gathered the papers and stood. I'll make sure everything is processed properly, he said. Mom nodded. Thank you, Thomas. After he left, the room went quiet. Mom picked up her crossword puzzle again, like nothing dramatic had happened. But I knew better. Something had happened. Something final. Laura had not been destroyed by anyone else's cruelty. She had simply reached the end of other people making excuses for her. And sitting there beside my mother, I understood the lesson clearly. Sometimes consequences do not arrive with noise. Sometimes they come softly, with a pen, a signature, and a door closing for good. Friday morning came colder than the 2 days before it. February 14th, Valentine's Day. Funny, isn't it? A day people use to talk about love, flowers, dinner reservations, and handwritten cards. And there I was, standing at the counter of Miller Auto Repair, picking up my truck after one of the loneliest weeks of my life. The mechanic slid the keys across the counter. "Alternator's fixed," he said. "You're good to go." Good to go. I almost smiled at that. Because my truck may have been fixed, but the rest of my life was still sitting in pieces around me. I paid the bill, stepped outside, and climbed into my 2018 Ford F-150. The engine turned over strong, steady, familiar. For a second, I just sat there with both hands on the wheel. Then my phone started ringing. Laura. I looked at her name on the screen until it stopped. Then it rang again, and again. By the fourth call, I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. Not because I was trying to punish her, not because I wanted to be cruel. I just had one priority that morning. My mother was being released from Riverside Methodist, and I was bringing her home. Everything else could wait. When I got to the hospital, Mom was already dressed in her own clothes, sitting in a wheelchair she clearly did not appreciate. Her blue cardigan was buttoned wrong at the bottom, and her overnight bag was packed beside her feet. "I can walk," she told the nurse. The nurse smiled like she had heard that sentence 10 times already. "I'm sure you can, Mrs. Bennett. Hospital policy." Mom looked at me. Hospital policy is just a polite way of saying nobody trusts me. I laughed for the first time that morning, and I needed that laugh more than I realized. I helped her into the truck slowly, carefully. She hated needing help, so I made sure not to make a big deal out of it. That was something I had learned about my mother. You did not take her independence from her. You simply stood close enough to catch her if she needed you. On the drive back to Maple Grove Avenue, she looked out the window most of the way. The city passed by in quiet pieces. Bare trees, gray sidewalks, morning traffic, people heading into ordinary days, not knowing ours had changed forever. My phone buzzed again. Laura. Mom glanced at it, then looked back out the window. She did not say a word. That was one of the most powerful things about my mother. She knew when silence could say more than a lecture. I got her home, unlocked the front door, and helped her inside. The house smelled the same as it always had. Lemon cleaner, old wood, a little bit of coffee, a little bit of home. I made her tea the way she liked it. Chamomile. 4 minutes. No more, no less. Then I sat with her at the kitchen table and went through every medication bottle, every instruction from Dr. Pierce, every follow-up appointment. She watched me for a while, with both hands wrapped around her mug. Finally, she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Daniel," she said. I stopped reading. "What I did with the will, I need you to understand something." I looked at her. "I didn't do it to punish Laura." I nodded, but she kept going. "I did it to protect what your father and I built. That house, those savings, that car in the garage. Those things are not just things. They are years. They are choices. They are sacrifices." Her voice stayed calm, but every word landed. "And they belong with someone who understands what it means to show up." I looked down at her hand on mine. Small hand, warm hand. The same hand that packed my lunches, waved from bleachers, held mine at Dad's funeral, and squeezed mine in a hospital room when she whispered, "You came." Then she said the sentence that finally broke through the last wall I had built around my marriage. "You have been showing up alone for a very long time, baby." I could not answer right away. Because she was right. I had been married, yes, but I had been standing alone in all the places that mattered. At hospital beds, at Sunday dinners, at family moments. In quiet disappointments I kept explaining away. Laura lived in my house, but she had not stood beside my life. I left Mom's place a little after noon. By then, Laura had called more than 20 times. When I walked into my own house, she was sitting in the living room, still in yesterday's clothes, her phone gripped in both hands. Her eyes were red, not from grief, from fear. "Daniel," she said, standing quickly, "I've been calling you." "I know," she swallowed. "Your mother changed the will." I set my keys on the table. So that was it. Not, how is she? Not, is Margaret home safely? Not, can I make this right? The will. That was what finally got her attention. She removed me from everything, Laura said. You need to talk to her. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. I looked at the woman I had spent 11 years defending, and for the first time, I did not feel the need to raise my voice. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. I told you my mother had chest pain. I told you her left arm was numb. I told you I needed help. Laura's mouth opened, but nothing came out. You made your choice, I said, and my mother made hers. She shook her head. That's not fair. No, I said softly. What happened to Mom wasn't fair. Harold showing up when you wouldn't wasn't fair. Me spending years making excuses for you wasn't fair. The room went quiet, and in that quiet I felt something I had not felt in years. Peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. I picked up my keys again. Where are you going? Laura asked. I looked at her one last time. To check on my mother. Then I walked out. No shouting. No slam door. No final insult. Just a man finally choosing the people who had always chosen him. And if there is one thing I learned from all of it, it is this. Love is not proven when life is easy. It is proven when someone is scared, tired, inconvenient, and needs you anyway. The people who love you will show up. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not loudly, but they will show up. And the ones who only appear when there is something to gain, eventually, life has a way of showing them the door. That morning, I did not lose my marriage. I finally stopped pretending I still had one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.